obviously, we're coming off of the Week 1 win to Detroit. However, the win did come with some losses, right? So I
Yeah.
want to just get into it right off the bat. The injury update. Obviously, we saw two big names go down in Mostert and Verrett. Can you give us an update on what those injuries look like and a timeline, if any, for them to come back?
Yeah, Verrett has the torn ACL, so he's out for the year. He's going to be on IR. He's done. That was announced today. And then Raheem Mostert, he also is going to be out. They're going to put him on IR as well with I think it's a chip. I think it was in his ligament in his knee. So he's going to be out for 8 weeks. So those are the two big ones right there. Jason Verrett out for the year. Raheem Mostert out for at least 8 weeks. The way that these things usually work with the 49ers, I'd be surprised if he's back right on track, because it usually seems like it takes a little bit longer than they expect. So, possibly, it's 8 weeks at the minimum right now. We'll see where he lands. And then on top of that, they had Dre Greenlaw. He left the game a little bit yesterday. He has that groin. He's still been bothered by that. He's day-to-day, they said. And then you have D Ford and Marcel Harris. D Ford had a slight ankle deal, but he was able to finish off the game, and he'll be able to play. Should be able to play against Philly. And the same thing with Marcel Harris. He had an oblique strain, minor deal. He should be able to be ready to go for Philadelphia after a day off.
Now, these obviously terrible news about Jason Verrett, not only just for the guy and for the team, but, he bet on himself this year, only signed a 1-year deal, and, obviously getting, a season-ending injury in the first game of the season in your prove-it deal. It's kind of tough. You wonder if he's even going to, attempt to make a comeback to the NFL, or if maybe this is just, too much just because of how much he's been dealing with injuries. Raheem Mostert, again, luckily the 49ers did draft enough depth to be able to have, some running backs after Raheem Mostert. You made a great call on our pregame show about Mitchell. I totally missed that. I thought it was going to be mostly Hasty. Hasty barely got the ball. It was all Mitchell, and he went above and beyond. But I do want to ask about two people whom necessarily maybe not were injured, but didn't play that often, and that is Brandon Ayuk, which I guess I shouldn't. Let's say Brandon Ayuk, because I know we're going to talk about him later.
Well, let's talk about the running backs for a minute if we can.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. That's what I want. So Trey Sermon now, what is the deal with him?
Well, the deal with Sermon was, according to Kyle Shanahan, the way that he broke it down was basically a situation where, he's been kind of dealing with some things, and although he's been running with the twos or with the ones, all throughout camp, once Elijah Mitchell came back from his, because he got dinged up a little bit too. Once Elijah Mitchell came back, they just felt like he was a little bit better than Sermon. I don't disagree with that. I think that, I like Sermon a lot, but I think that Mitchell looked really good throughout training camp. And so when you're looking at building out the roster for the game days, it just didn't work out. They needed to have somebody sit down, and they felt most comfortable with Hasty and Mitchell behind Mostert. Those guys are definitely, I'd say they're maybe a little bit more explosive than Sermon. Sermon's a tough runner, but he's not necessarily the most explosive back. So that makes sense that they would go that direction. It was definitely a surprise. Definitely caught all of us by surprise, though, because I think we're expecting him to get a lot of carries.
Right. So he has to be on the list now, right? He's going to be activated. He's not going to be a healthy scratch because they only have the 3 running backs now, right?
Right. Yeah. So now it's a moot point because he'll be one of the active backs. They're going to probably have to sign somebody so they have another back on the practice squad that they can have as well. So keep an eye out for them to probably add another running back. I just find this one all interesting because if you remember after the draft, there was a lot of folks that were complaining about the fact that they took two running backs in the draft, right? Over instead of getting a cornerback there in the whatever round it was, they took him.
Yeah.
They were. Well, no, I'm talking in the third round when they took Sermon.
Oh yeah.
They went a different direction, and you had a lot of people complaining about that. But here we are. I understand they have a little bit of lack of. They got two cornerbacks and two running backs in the draft. Both of those positions, those 2 running backs are going to have to be playing now, and they're going to be playing big roles this team if they're gonna be successful here in 2021. And the cornerback position, we already saw one of them had a heck of a game yesterday, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a little bit.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about. I just have one more question about the running backs, and then we can move on.
Yeah.
Do you think that with the running back core without Mostert, can they still be, a top 3 rushing attack?
Yeah, I think they can be pretty close to that. I think we saw it yesterday, right? He was out of the game, and you had Mitchell come in and still 19 carries, 104 yards, first 49er rookie running back ever to have 100 yards in the first game of the season. Mm-hmm. You saw him come on, and he's not going to be as explosive as Raheem Mostert. None of them are that explosive to where they can basically, almost every time they touch the ball, you expect them to make 9 or 10 yards. They just bring a little bit different dimension in terms of their physicality, and I think they'll be fine. It's going to be very similar to what it was in 2019 when he was out, or even really last year for some points. With Jeff Wilson Jr. when Jeff Wilson Jr. was healthy, like against. Who was it? New England. He had a really good game there as a starter. A couple of times that he started, he was very, very good. So I think they're going to be okay with the running game.
I agree, and obviously, I think we don't really have it as a question, but that offensive line, I think, played really well. I always say if you don't hear about any of these offensive linemen, you don't hear their name. That means that they're doing pretty well, and they played a pretty clean brand of ball. I think Jimmy G was only sacked maybe a few times, had maybe under 10 pressures. It seemed like, I don't know the actual numbers, but it seemed like a pretty clean brand of ball from the offensive line, and obviously the rushing attack with Mostert out was still able to be very effective. So you got to give a lot of credit to that offensive line for playing lights out.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. On that point with the offensive line, if you go back and you watch the Mitchell touchdown run, there were some really nice blocks by George Kittle had a really good block on the edge, and Michael McGlinchey had a really good block. That's what got him out to the out into space, and then he ran through the tackle at the end. But yeah, they only gave up the 1 sack on the day. There was only a couple of pressures that were credited to the offensive linemen, one to McGlinchey and one to Daniel Brunskill. There wasn't a whole lot of pressure on Garoppolo, and I know we're going to talk more about him later, but I think part of it is him helping the offensive line out as well with his release, getting up to go the ball out quick.
Great segue.